Blood rushed to Marcus Wilson's face as he stood in the school office, the secretary's words hanging in the air like a slap. Perhaps if you can't afford proper clothes for your daughter, you should reconsider your priorities. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at his worn work boots and paint-splattered jeans. But what none of them knew, not the sneering secretary, not the whispering parents in their designer outfits, not even the principal watching from her office doorway, was that Marcus Wilson had just signed the papers that morning. Papers that would make him the majority owner of the very ground they stood on. If you're feeling that surge of satisfaction already, hit that like button and subscribe to catch more stories of sweet justice and unexpected twists that'll leave you breathless. Trust me, you'll want to see how this one unfolds. Marcus gripped his daughter Lily's small hand tighter as they walked out of Westridge Academy's gleaming front doors. The 7-year-old's eyes were downcast, her shoulders slumped under the weight of embarrassment. It wasn't the first time they'd been treated this way, but it was the first time it had happened in front of her classmates. "Daddy, why was that lady so mean?" Lily whispered once they were safely inside their rusted pickup truck. Marcus swallowed hard, fighting back the words he really wanted to say. "Some people judge books by their covers, sweetheart. They see our old truck and my work clothes and think they know everything about us. What they didn't see was the man who worked 18-hour days, who read bedtime stories no matter how exhausted he was, who had built a life for his daughter from nothing after her mother abandoned them 3 years ago. But my uniform is clean, and I did my homework," Lily said, her voice small and confused. "I know, baby. You did everything right." Marcus started the engine, which coughed twice before rumbling to life. "And I'm so proud of you." The truth was, Marcus could have bought Lily a dozen new uniforms. He could have pulled up to school in a Bentley instead of his trusty old Ford. He could have moved them out of their modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town into a mansion in the hills overlooking the city. But that wasn't the plan. Not yet. Marcus Wilson had grown up poor in this same town, raised by a single mother who cleaned houses for the wealthy families whose children attended Westridge Academy. He'd watched her break her back for pennies, treated like she was invisible by the very people whose intimate spaces she maintained. He'd promised himself that someday, things would be different. After high school, while his classmates went to prestigious universities, Marcus joined the military. 4 tours later, he returned with discipline, leadership skills, and a vision. He started small, a one-man handyman service that grew into a construction crew, then a company. He lived frugally, invested wisely, and worked relentlessly. 6 months ago, he'd received the call that changed everything. A tech giant wanted to build their new headquarters in their small city, and they needed someone who understood the local landscape. Marcus's company, Wilson Construction, was now the silent partner behind the biggest development project the city had seen in 50 years, a project that included the land Westridge Academy sat on. The school didn't know it yet, but their lease would be up for renegotiation in exactly 3 months. That evening, after tucking Lily into bed with extra hugs and her favorite story, Marcus sat at his small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his laptop. The email from his business partner, James Chen, was waiting. "All set for tomorrow's board meeting? The school board doesn't know what's coming." Marcus stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Revenge would be easy. He could raise the rent astronomically. He could refuse to renew their lease altogether. He could watch as the prestigious Westridge Academy scrambled to find a new location, as the smug secretary and condescending principal were forced to explain to their wealthy clientele why they suddenly had nowhere to educate their children. But that wasn't who Marcus Wilson was. He typed his response, "I'm ready. But we're going with Plan B." The next morning, Marcus dropped Lily off at school, giving her an extra tight hug before watching her walk through those imposing doors. Then he drove to his small office downtown, changed into the suit he kept there for important meetings, and headed to the Westridge Academy board meeting. The boardroom fell silent as Marcus walked in. James Chen, already seated at the table, gave him a subtle nod. The board members, a collection of the city's elite, looked confused by the unexpected addition to their meeting. "Mr. Wilson, the board president, Harold Blackwell, said with a frown. "This is a private meeting." Marcus smiled and took a seat at the table. "Actually, I was invited by Mr. Chen, who represents the property management company that owns this land." Murmurs rippled through the room. "And as of yesterday," Marcus continued, "I am the majority stakeholder in that company." The color drained from Harold Blackwell's face. "I don't understand." "It's simple," Marcus said, opening his briefcase and removing a folder. "Your lease is up for renegotiation, and I'm here to discuss terms." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. These people knew who he was now, not just the shabby single dad in work clothes, but the businessman who held their future in his hands. "Before we begin," Marcus said, "I'd like to discuss something that happened yesterday." He recounted the incident in the office, watching as faces around the table grew uncomfortable. Principal Diana Reynolds, seated to Blackwell's right, looked particularly mortified. "Mr. Wilson," she began, "I want to apologize for." Marcus held up his hand. "I'm not here for apologies, Principal Reynolds. I'm here to talk about change." For the next hour, Marcus outlined his vision. Yes, he would renew their lease, at the same rate they'd been paying. But there would be conditions. A scholarship fund for underprivileged children in the community. A complete overhaul of the school's diversity and inclusion policies. Mandatory sensitivity training for all staff. And a new community outreach program that would bring Westridge's resources to the poorer schools across town. "This isn't charity," Marcus explained. "It's investment in our community's future. My daughter attends this school because it offers the best education in the city. Every child deserves that opportunity." By the end of the meeting, the board had unanimously approved his proposals. As people filed out, Principal Reynolds approached him. "Why didn't you just tell us who you were?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked her in the eye. "Would it have changed how you treated me? How your staff treated my daughter?" She had no answer for that. That afternoon, when Marcus picked up Lily from school, the secretary who had humiliated them the day before couldn't meet his eyes. Principal Reynolds personally walked them to their truck. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Marcus asked as they drove home. "Better," Lily said. "Ms. Reynolds came to our class and talked about respect and not judging people. And she said there's going to be a special program for kids who need help with school stuff." Marcus smiled. "That sounds nice." "Daddy," Lily said after a moment, "are we poor?" Marcus glanced at his daughter, this bright, compassionate child who was his whole world. "No, baby. We're rich in all the ways that matter." He didn't tell her about the trust fund he'd established in her name, or about the new house he was planning to build for them. There would be time for that. For now, he wanted her to understand the value of hard work, of kindness, of seeing people for who they really were rather than what they owned or wore. 6 months later, Westridge Academy held a ceremony to open its new community center, built by Wilson Construction. The center would provide after-school programs, tutoring, and resources for families throughout the city. Marcus stood in the back of the crowd, watching as Lily and her classmates, a much more diverse group now, thanks to the new scholarship program, cut the ribbon. Principal Reynolds spotted him and made her way over. "You could have destroyed us," she said quietly. "Instead, you made us better." Marcus shrugged. "That was always the plan. Your daughter told her class yesterday that her hero is her dad, not because you're successful, but because you're kind even when others aren't." Marcus felt his throat tighten. In that moment, he knew that all his success, all his wealth, all his careful planning meant nothing compared to those words. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus walked over to Lily, who was showing a new student around the center. She looked up and beamed at him, then introduced her friend. "This is my dad," she said proudly. "He built this place. The new student, a boy about Lily's age in clothes that reminded Marcus of his own childhood, looked up at him with wide eyes. "You built this whole building?" Marcus knelt down to the boy's level. "I had help. Lots of it. That's the secret, you know, nobody does great things alone." Later that night, as Marcus tucked Lily into bed in their still modest apartment, the new house was almost ready, but he was in no rush. She asked him a question. "Daddy, are you famous now? Everyone at school knows who you are." Marcus laughed. "No, I'm not famous. I'm just your dad." "That's better than being famous," Lily declared, snuggling into her pillow. As Marcus turned out the light, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. He thought about his mother, who hadn't lived to see his success but whose strength had shaped him. He thought about the years of struggle, the doubts, the setbacks. And he thought about that moment in the school office, when he'd stood there, humiliated but unbowed, holding his daughter's hand. Success wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about proving people wrong. It was about creating something meaningful, about lifting others as you climbed, about teaching your children that true worth had nothing to do with wealth or status. The following week, Marcus received a letter from the school board. They were unanimously voting to rename the new community center after his mother, Margaret Wilson, in recognition of her years of service to the community, years spent cleaning the homes of the very people who now honored her name. Marcus sat in his truck for a long time after reading that letter, tears streaming down his face. Sometimes, justice came in unexpected ways. Sometimes, the greatest victory wasn't in making others fall, but in helping them rise to be better than they were. And sometimes, the poorest man in the room was actually the richest all along. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content that reminds us all of the power of resilience, forgiveness, and the unexpected ways life can surprise us. Remember, it's not about where you start, it's about how you choose to write your own ending.